Talking baseball, baseball and the
Oh, welcome back to the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Benny Becker. Thrilled as always, gang, to be sitting down here talking Baltimore Orioles baseball with all of you. We have a fantastic episode on our hands today, even though it's kind of not the most exciting time of the baseball season, to say the least. Our episode title is March Mundaness, playing off of March Madness, because it's a little mundane right now in the MLB world. About halfway through spring training, but still we find ways to have fantastic episodes here as we have a great rundown talking injury updates. Felix Bautista, Coby Mayo, Colton Cowser, Jorge Mateo. I have a great Jason Worth story that you will want to hear. Really hilarious. I'm the villain in it, and Worth comes out victorious, to say the least. And then we also have a topic that I don't know how we haven't talked about yet. In the Orioles all orange uniforms. Very exciting stuff, gangs. Truly don't know how we haven't mentioned that yet. But make sure you stay tuned to our future episodes every Monday and Thursday this season. As you know, we will have a lot of great Instagram, TikTok, X stuff coming your way on social media. A lot of content coming your way this season as well. So be sure to follow us at Talkin Orioles Baseball on those platforms. But like I said, got a lot of fun stuff to talk about on today's episode. So let's just jump right in, gang. Start no further with the couple spring training games that have happened since our last episode on Monday. We have games 9 and 10. Game 11 is currently about to start tonight. Very exciting kind of night game for the Orioles tonight. So excited to watch that. But in the meantime, we'll talk the past two games. We had a 6-6 tie against the Red Sox. That's right. Ties do happen in spring training, not in real baseball, but in this baseball. Now, listen, you know I'm not going to go too heavy on any of these spring training games or stat lines, but I certainly want to fill you in where guys succeeded. Adley Rutschman had his first spring training home run. It kind of barely got over the wall in right field. He went 1 for 2 on the day with that home run. Tyler O'Neill and Ryan O'Hearn, the O-Boys, each went 1 for 3 with a strikeout. Ryan Mountcastle 1 for 2 with an RBI. And Heston Kjerstad continues to put in a good spring training, going 1 for 2 that day. Really, the pitching in that game is where I want to focus a little more attention on. Charlie Morton had another start, 2 innings, 1 hit, 1 K, no walks, no runs. Love so far what we've seen out of the veteran Charlie Morton, as we talked about him last episode, sprinkling his knowledge around, if you will. Then the other new man to the rotation, Tomo Sugano, came in right after Morton, had 2 innings, 2 hits, 1 walk. So again, a little more base runners is maybe what we've seen from him. But this time also got strikeouts, 2 strikeouts, didn't allow a run. Love also what we've seen from Tomo. Those two guys are going to impart so much wisdom on this young team. I really love what it's going to do for the other guys in the clubhouse, having them there. That's something we talked about last episode. But you also love to see when there's positive results with these two veterans. Again, early into spring training, still spring training in general doesn't really mean much, but a lot of good stuff to like in these two guys that are new to this rotation. And it's something we've talked about in past episodes, and really, I feel like we're going to continue talking about unless the wheels start falling off once the season gets here. Hopefully that's not the case, and we continue to talk positive things about Tomo and Morton. Also, the biggest story from that game comes from on the mound. The man who followed those two was no other than Felix Bautista. The Mountain is back. It's going to be a topic that we hit very early in this episode because obviously it holds mass significance. And also what's significant is how we saw Bautista pitch in that game. 1 inning, which get used to, he's not going to be pitching multiple innings for at least most of this season. if not all season, but definitely in spring training. 1 inning pitched, 2 Ks, no walks, no hits, no runs. Felix Bautista seems back. But again, we're going to touch more on that and the significance not only to the Orioles, but also what we're seeing from Bautista in that first appearance a little more this episode. So that brings us to the next day, a 5-2 win against the Minnesota Twins. Adley continues producing this spring. 2 for 3 with an RBI. Colton Cowser, who we'll talk about a little later this episode, 1 for 3 and a walk with an RBI. Heston Kjerstad, again, continuing to remain hot, 2 for 4 with an RBI. These are all guys, obviously, that we're going to be talking about mass amounts in the season and also relying on to have the season that we're hoping to have, gang. So great stuff out of those 3 guys and some more, frankly. We've been seeing a lot of positive stuff from a lot of guys so far in this spring training. Grayson Rodriguez had a start that drew a lot of criticism, and we'll touch on that in a second. Overall numbers were 1 1/3, 3 hits, 1 walk, 1 K, 1 earned run. Not the flashiest numbers, and certainly possibly concerning if all you're doing is looking at numbers, because his velocity was down in that start. In fact, he had a 4-seam fastball that would have registered as his slowest 4-seam fastball of his entire career in that start. Obviously, that's something that can raise alarm bells. That can make, you get worried for a second. I just want to let you know that that was apparently by design. They wanted him to, not pitch 100% at any point this spring training, up to this point at least. That's one of their things that they wanted him to work on. Maybe not throwing 95 or 100%, that is. And instead, just ramping yourself up for that season. Because obviously they want to keep him healthy, something he's struggled with in his career thus far. And that's one of the ways that you do that. You don't want to overwork this guy. And when you do put him out there, you don't want him really putting himself fully out there. You'd rather him just go through the motions a bit, work on certain things, and not have to worry about velocity. If you remember, around this time last year, it was something we were talking about with Grayson Rodriguez in spring training. How the Orioles weren't worried that he had a low velocity start because that was by design. We've seen Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde and this front office and coaching staff and developmental group come together on things like this. So do not be worried about Grayson Rodriguez after what appeared to not be a positive start, to say the least, and also appeared to maybe be a worrisome start. Take a breath. Take a breath, Birdland. I know we're so ready to hear some bad news, but luckily, seems like we've been getting a lot of good news. Certainly one piece of news we're about to touch on was not so great, but let's look at a lot of the things there and call them positive, because they are. Albert Suarez has had a rocky spring training, to say the least. It's something we've touched on a couple times. He had 3 2/3 innings thrown, which usually you don't see guys maybe stretched out that much at this point in spring training. Albert's one of those wild cards where he could come in for a batter or two or could come in for 3-4 innings. So doesn't surprise me that he's the type of guy that would do that for the Orioles. In those 3 2/3, he allowed 4 hits, 1 walk, 2 Ks, 1 earned. Pretty solid debut, or pretty solid appearance, from Albert Suarez, who really I don't think has another one under his belt. His ERA did go down to 9, which was really good to see because I think it was living in the 20s at one point. But still, Suarez, especially after a performance like that, seems like he's the favorite to remain in that long relief role for the Orioles. Last couple guys we're going to touch on are keys to the bullpen. One guy particular that we touched on last episode, Keegan Aiken, an inning thrown, 1 walk and a K, no runs. Brian Baker, who is looking for maybe that last spot in the bullpen, a man that we're going to touch on a little later this episode, had an innings pitched, no hits, no walks, no Ks, but also no runs. So good stuff out of Baker. Really, we've seen all spring training. Again, something we're going to mention and touch on a little bit down the road. So now that the spring training games are in our rearview mirror, let's update you guys on the injuries if you're not already familiar. I know we had two big ones that we touched on last episode in Westberg and Gunnar. One has taken, I think, a positive turn. One has potentially taken a negative turn. And then a newcomer to the list also, which isn't, frankly, a good thing. Although, it's funny how life works. Sometimes things that we view maybe not being the best for us turn out to be the best, for everything. So we'll touch on that. To start, though, let's go to Jordan Westberg. He had that back injury that kind of popped up on him. Kind of a funny story where his Airbnb had a soft mattress. He likes a very hard mattress, like a lot of these athletes tend to do. And frankly, he thought he could just, grit it out, if you will. Unfortunately, his back twinged on it. He didn't like it, so he got himself a mattress cover that's very firm. He's very confident that the back injury is going to disappear now and all will be well. And I don't know if you can leave a bad review on an Airbnb property because of a soft mattress. That might be a positive to most people. So, listen, what can you do, gang? What can you do? Live and learn. I feel like now moving forward in spring training, maybe he gets a mattress delivered there that he knows is going to be good. I could see Westy being that kind of guy. Also, side note, I'm going down to spring training next year, I believe, for my bachelor party. And we're looking at Airbnbs. And God, I would love to know where that Airbnb is and find a way for those few days to be neighbors with guys like Jordan Westberg and Adley Rushman and Gunnar Henderson and Mountcastle, I believe, is there. And I can't remember who the fifth one is. I remember reading about. But neither way, seemed like, Colton Cowser, I believe. So seemed like a very fun house to be in. Or at least next to for a few days. So I would love to find a way to figure out that Airbnb in a not creepy way, but like just look out and see the guys going to spring training in the morning or coming back. That would just kind of be cool. Anyway, next injury, obviously the most important one in all of Birdland right now, Gunnar Henderson. And the injury might be slightly worse than initially expected. It's not necessarily that we've gotten news that it's worse, because we haven't. It's more that when it first happened, the Orioles were like, there's no worry about opening day. And now they're like, maybe there's a worry about opening day. That's certainly a eye raiser and something you don't love to hear. Ultimately, he was diagnosed with a mild right intercostal strain. I don't know what that means, gang. I'm not a doctor. But neither here or there. It still seems like opening day is probable. While it is in question slightly, Hyde said the club will continue to, quote, slow play the recovery. They're not going to put Gunnar Henderson in risk to re-aggravate it and something that's going to be an issue a month or two down the road. Like we talked last episode when it happened, remember his oblique injury at this point in spring training last year and how opening day was in question and we worried maybe it lingered a month or two and instead he got out of the gate as an MVP candidate. So keep good thoughts. They did want to say they're focused on not rushing him back into action and maybe he doesn't play again in spring training, but is there on opening day. I'd be okay with that. Maybe his timing then is a little delayed, but Gunnar can have success even when his timing's not perfect. And again, he was held out of spring training games for a long time with the oblique injury, and he still got out of the box very hot. So who knows with these things. Brandon Hyde also said, quote, "I'm very, very hopeful on him playing opening day." So, again, feeling optimistic that Gunnar will be there, and they're just being precautious like they typically are. Gunnar's yet to see the IL in his career, knock on wood, so hopefully he can work through this and be there for opening day like we all want him to and remain healthy while coming back. Hyde said, quote, "It's kind of a day-to-day thing. He is improving. He feels good. He's feeling better. We're not going to push him out there unless we know that this thing is cleared up." I mean, that seems obvious. You know what I mean? Like they want him just to be healthy. And at this point, I think they look at Gunnar Henderson and go, we're okay with him not taking any more spring training game reps and maybe not much backfield work. Just kind of being around and going through some rehab and going through some recovery, and then in 2.5 weeks or so, be there for opening day. If Gunnar does, though, have to start the season on the IL, what does that mean for the roster construction? Well, certainly there's a spot that is open. I would peg it down to about 3 guys that have a chance at that spot until Gunnar gets back. And those names are Coby Mayo, Livan Soto, and Emmanuel Rivera. Out of the 3, I would peg Rivera as the front runner based off of what he did last season and how he's performed this spring. However, if you're losing your starting shortstop and you're still down Jorge Mateo, then that kind of puts you in the spot. Do you want to play Jackson Holiday now more at short during that span? And then you can move Westy to third, and that would open up that third base playing time for a Mayo or Rivera? Or does it make more sense to just go Livan Soto, who has also been having an okay spring and is a player the Orioles clearly liked when he came available, and giving Livan Soto the shot and just making him the everyday shortstop? That way you don't have to now adjust Jackson Holiday's focus, which has been on improving at second base, and out of nowhere being like, hey, go back to playing short for a couple weeks. That would also mean, that because otherwise I don't know who's playing short, gang. Jordan Westberg, I know, could technically play short, but certainly doesn't really have the range or the speed. And that's it. That's the list, gang. So, if, God forbid, Gunnar Henderson starts the season on the IL, one of those 3 guys is going to wind up making the team because of that injury. I do not expect that, though. If it wasn't for the oblique injury last year, which I feel like is one of those that is a worse injury and can linger longer than whatever the heck this is, and I think it's a similar spot, but I think it's maybe more towards the front than the back. I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert on medicine, gang. Let's just hope for the best, hold our breath a bit, and expect that Gunnar Henderson will be with this team, if not on opening day, within a couple weeks of opening day. I think that's not too much to ask for. The newcomer to the injury list is somebody we're not thrilled with seeing, but like we said, sometimes things happen for the best, and maybe this could be one of them. But we still are holding our breath and hoping for the best, because this also could be a season-ending thing. That's Andrew Kittredge, the new reliever that we brought in from the Cardinals, who we just talked about last episode being a swing and miss expert, making guys chase balls out of the zone, which he led MLB statistically last season. He had a sore left knee, which doesn't sound bad. The part that then sounds bad is when it says the Orioles are seeking multiple options or multiple opinions, before determining the next step. Like, that just feels ominous, gang. And I'm not saying it is bad. I don't have any information, and the Orioles haven't let anybody know yet what the actual injury is. That just has an ominous feel to it. Now, he is 35, and that's what you get when you sign one of these older pitchers. Especially if you're signing technically 3 older pitchers in him, Morton, and Tomo. Statistically speaking, at least one of those guys is going to break down at some point. Now, let's look at best case scenario. Most people would be like, best case scenario is he's completely healthy and starts the year on the roster and is just pitching. Sure, but let me throw in this possible best case scenario. Whereas he needs a month, maybe 2, until he can come back. And that then opens up a spot for Brian Baker, who most likely at the moment is not going to make our team and will absolutely be picked up by somebody. Brian Baker is out of options. And when you look at how he's performed this spring, we just mentioned one of his appearances. Well, he's retired all 9 hitters he's faced this spring. He's been doing a great job. And really, it's not that surprising because he's the type of guy that has shown the potential to be a very reliable reliever. And I would hate losing Brian Baker. So I almost would argue that the best case scenario for the Orioles is for Kittredge to maybe be out with this knee thing for a month, maybe 2. Certainly not have it be a season ender, and certainly have him back well before the All-Star break, and have him for down the stretch. Not only would that keep Brian Baker on the team to start the season and give you the ability to see if this is going to stick in the majors this year, but also from a 35-year-old reliever standpoint, this takes innings off of Kittredge's year and thus takes innings off of his arm come the biggest parts of the season. If you can get him back, let's say a month before the All-Star break, and have him for 4 months of the season instead of 6 months of the season, that's 2 less months on a 35-year-old's arm. All I'm saying is that probably keeps his arm fresher for the back half of the season and the postseason. Gang, that's the best case scenario. So while I'm not rooting for anyone to get injured, the truth of the matter is sometimes, while this doesn't seem like a positive thing, there might wind up being positive effects from it. Because the way the year works, we could then be able to bring back Kittredge right around the time one of our other bullpen guys goes down. Or maybe around the time that a Brian Baker or somebody like that starts not being able to get out in the majors, starts struggling. I don't know. Time will tell. Again, I want Andrew Kittredge on this or in this bullpen this season. I want him there for the biggest moments of this season. I think he's very beneficial, just like we talked about last episode, for this bullpen in general. But being able to give him a month or 2 extra off this season and come back for the best, biggest parts of your season, gang, that could be a win-win every which way. So let's hope that's the case. All right, now to wrap up kind of any, quote, injury news, and thank goodness this is not injury news, is that we're back on Mountain Time, gang. Felix Bautista is officially back with the Orioles. He had his first real outing after 556 days off. Very long time since we've seen the mound, and frankly, does not feel like that long of time. But also, it does feel like that long of time in many ways. Like, it feels like, gosh, it seems like it was just a few months ago at the end of last season we didn't have him, or where he went down. But then it also is like, God, dude, like, don't forget the horrors of last year. By the end of the season and postseason, our back end of the bullpen had started to settle out a little. But for 8/10, 9/10 of the year, that was rocky and that was horrible. So it's a beautiful thing seeing him come back and get right back into form, gang. 3 faced, 3 down. 9 pitches for strikes, 13 pitches in total. Retired all 3 batters, 2 of which on the Ks. Velocity only hit 97, mostly was living at 96. Not like we've seen in the upper or even lower hundreds, upper 90s, lower hundreds. Again, like we said last episode, he's ramping up and his velocity is ticking up each time. By the time we should see him at least 3 or 4 more times, I would imagine. I would assume that by opening day, he's back at 100, if not higher. Splitter looked great, although velocity was also lower, usually in the low 90s. This time was in the mid 80s. Again, velocity continues to tick up, and I'm sure they're telling him not to throw 100%, just like they're telling Grayson Rodriguez not to throw 100%. All right? And on those lines, they're going to continue being cautious with Bautista. Not only this spring, but also in the season. Hyde said that they're going to have no consecutive days thrown, not pitching more than 1 inning, and sometimes even limiting how many times he warms up without coming into games, right? Getting heated and then not throwing, that might essentially count as an appearance in the Orioles' minds this year when it comes to Bautista. Now, to quote what Felix on what he missed, he said everything. Warming up in the bullpen, trotting to the mound, getting into the game, hearing the fans, and having Adley catch me. Then they asked him, how about Adley's trademark hug at the end of an appearance? Bautista said, smiling, I missed it too. So did we, Felix. So did we. It's exciting stuff. I can't wait till hopefully opening day when the Orioles have a lead and that man comes into the 9th and we get the best walk-in in baseball, the whistling. I love it. It's good stuff, great stuff. Love hearing it. Again, thank goodness that we're wrapping up our quote injury talk with a guy who seems like he's past that. Seems like he's back. The mountain is back. We're back on mountain time. It's a glorious day, gang. Glorious day. Now, we talked previously in an episode about the Orioles moving their left field in from the adjustments they made 3 years ago. And we talked a little about the ripple effect from that, but I wanted to dig a little more into that right now because there was an article talking about actual statistics to back where the Orioles kind of are trying to get to. All right, which essentially is a more neutral field between batters and pitchers. Now, at various points, the wall's either going to be 9 to 20 feet closer to home plate. And as far as height, it's going to be 3 to 6 feet shorter in different parts, okay? Now, certainly it's not going to be as short as the old original left field. It's going to be what they want in a happy middle. You know what I mean? Somewhere in a happy middle. Quote, or to quote Mike Elias, directionally correct move, but we overcorrected. They knew they couldn't keep the bandbox that was Camden Yards originally. The game had just gotten way too powerful to have a left field that short and that low. So they really went to the other extreme, which was Wallimore, the Great Wall of Baltimore. It was something that ate home runs alive. Truly, we'd be watching the games, and there would be a no doubt home run, whether it was for the Orioles or against it, whether I was happy the ball ate it or not. There's some things in baseball that you see and you go, that's a home run. And when you'd see the ball fly 370 and being out, even if it was positive for the Orioles, it's still like, they need to do something about this, gang. So the actual data to it shows that the wall saved 137 home runs in the span of those 3 years. About 46 home runs a year between the Orioles pitchers and visiting pitchers. Now, based off of past numbers and home runs around the league and whatever, new wall dimensions should add about 80 home runs in the next 3 years. So 25 home runs a year. And that's not off of the Wallimore numbers, obviously. That's off of the original short and low left field porch in the original Camden Yards. So instead of 46 home runs a year taken away, now this will only take away 25 home runs a year based off of that original metric. Now, it's interesting, but not like wild, but makes sense that really when you look at the numbers, it seemed like Orioles batters and pitchers were really evenly taken away. So it didn't necessarily have a negative effect on the ball games because it would go one way or the other. The problem there being is then that created kind of this effect where sometimes, depending on the game, depending on the situation, it would only have a, let's say, 3% effect on the game. Whereas other times it would have a 60s, 80% effect on the game. Or at least a 4 times multiple on that 3%. So, an interesting thing though, and again, this goes back to the whole narrative of sometimes when you see it, you know what it should be. And if then it's not, then there's an issue. So balls that, again, for the Orioles or against the Orioles, were no doubt home runs that wound up falling short, maybe for a hit or maybe for an out. It was just getting too extreme. And this number is going to really highlight that. So in the last 3 years, there would have been 1,050 home runs hit throughout baseball in every park, not just Camden Yards, but every baseball hit in every major league park. There are 1,050 that would have been home runs in those in every other park except Baltimore. And you might be like, oh, well, I'm sure that happens a lot for different stadiums or ballparks. The next closest park was San Francisco, and they were 479 home runs in every park except San Francisco. The Orioles had over 1,000. That just shows you they overcorrected, like Mike Elias said. You needed to bring the wall in. And I'm excited. I think it's going to have, obviously, a more neutral playing field as far as hitter park, pitcher park. It's going to restore the order of hard hit balls to left as far as Camden Yards goes. But frankly, I think it's going to have a little more of that old school Camden Yards feel. Right? The longer wall, the adjustment to the wall, every time I was at the ballpark, folks, it felt like, most of this is still perfect, but that just, again, it wasn't even necessarily in my mind because of the home runs it took away or whatever. It was just aesthetically not the ballpark that I fell in love with back in the day. It was still close and still a ballpark that I love immensely, but that left field part, it just was like, they kind of screwed that up. I wish it was the old way. But the old way you can't play in anymore and expect to be a championship team, I truly believe. It's just going to screw you probably more often than not. In which case, I'm excited for this new dimension that should make it feel more like the Camden Yards we all know and love without being a liability to the ball club on the field. I'm excited, gang. I'm excited to see it on that first day. I really am. Because you see the renderings and the graphic designs, but ultimately it comes down to when you're sitting in that seat and you look over there, does it look like a familiar place? I think this is going to have that familiar feel to it. I really hope so. And either way, I think it'll be beneficial for the ball club as a whole. Certainly guys like Ryan Mountcastle, Adley Rushman are due to get home runs off of it because they've lost home runs over the past couple years. We saw how it essentially ruined Austin Hayes' Orioles career because it really took the power away from him when he was at home. He won't be the last guy that would have happened to had that stayed that way. So it's a great thing. Also, Tyler O'Neill seemed very excited. Also, how could you not when you're that muscular and hit from the right side? So now our next guy is another power hitter, speaking of power hitters, but not one that's really looking in form right now. We're going to call it Spoiled Mayo. Talking Coby Mayo. It's something we did a couple episodes ago, talking about his herky-jerky motion. And frankly, he's just having a very hard time in spring training, at least offensively. I luckily haven't heard any negative defensive talk about Coby Mayo this offseason, this spring training. So that's a positive, I guess, to take away, that maybe he's looking better defensively. Or the takeaway is, frankly, that his offense has been so bad that nobody even cares about any other part of his game. And if he was poor defensively, they're not going to tear him down completely in this moment. Because he's struggling, gang. He's tied for the most at-bats for the Orioles this spring training in 20, so they're giving him opportunities. And in those opportunities, he has a batting average of .05, meaning he's 1 for 20, drew a walk, so 21 plate appearances, twice scored a run. Now, 5 Ks in his 21 plate appearances might actually wind up being the best stat of his whole spring so far. As crazy as that sounds. Like, the fact that he's not striking out in half plate appearances, he's striking out in a quarter of his plate appearances, might actually show like, well, at least he's getting his bat on the ball. At least he's putting the ball in play. Unfortunately, I know at least one of the at-bats was a first pitch foul tip that the catcher caught. Like, it was a little unlucky that one, the catcher was able to catch it, and two, that it did go into the stands. It was right there. But ultimately, like, that's one of those plate appearances in which he didn't strike out. And certainly that is not a good plate appearance. And it's tough to watch. You feel bad for him because he's such a prolific prospect. His only hit, too, again, he's 1 for 20. His only hit came in the second game. It was the one against the Phillies. It was a 2 RBI single through the infield. It wasn't like the most impressive hit. I don't know how it rated as far as exit velocity. Maybe it was above 90, but I'm sure it was under 100. I would imagine. If it snuck over 100, good for him. But it didn't look overly impressive as far as a hard hit ball. It just kind of found the outfield. That's his one hit this spring, gang. Now, again, the organization continues to give him the opportunity, at the very least, to just improve and work through this. But, again, possibly to fight for a roster spot. Gang, again, where we speak, there's at least the potential that Gunnar Henderson is on the IL to start the season. And if Coby Mayo was forcing his hand and hitting the ball hard and getting on base and hitting home runs, he might be the guy that would be due for the call-up. Ultimately, that's not going to happen if this is how you're performing. Now, again, we've talked about his herky-jerky motion, and maybe that could be the issue. Frankly, I think it is the issue. Since I've seen Coby Mayo for the past few years, to me it was always like, something doesn't look right in his swing, and yet he continued getting these results. So it's Not crazy that he hasn't worked through them yet and they haven't changed him yet. But again, I'm no expert, gang. I'm not a baseball coach, but it just looks very herky-jerky. Where, like, he's not set. He doesn't have his weight ready to distribute. And if he was a slap speed guy, okay. But he's a big power guy. He's supposed to be a power bat. You need the power locked and ready to and loaded and ready to explode through that baseball. I don't know. Could be a bit of bad luck. Again, most of these games aren't televised, and maybe he's had a couple hits. Maybe just 2 or 3 robbed from him. Because frankly, 3 hits and you don't feel that bad. 4 hits and you don't feel like his numbers are that bad. Unfortunately, 1 for 20 is just really bad. So maybe he's gotten robbed of a couple hits. Maybe he's focusing too much on improving defensively and he's just not focusing on the offense in a way that's allowing him to be successful. Again, it's not an easy process. I get that. Sometimes you put your effort and focus into one thing and it helps with the other thing. Other times it hinders the other thing. Sometimes you've been able to hit your whole life and now you're worried about your defense and out of nowhere you can't hit anymore. I'm sure if it's that will come back. You work through those when you're this talented. Overall, though, he's not performing well enough to really ever be deserving of that call-up if there were a spot right now. So odds are he's going to head back to AAA and work through it. Frankly, there's not really a roster spot for him this season unless somebody on the outsides in the corners get hurt. There just really isn't that spot like we've talked about. Another guy who might, when he comes back, be wondering if he has a spot, and that's Jorge Mateo. Where Mateo fits, I think, is right where he should be, in a utility role on this team when he's healthy. It's confirmed, though, that he's going to be starting the season on the IL, and just like I think Kittredge starting the season on the IL might be the best thing for the team, I also think Jorge Mateo taking the first 2 to 4 weeks off in the season might be the best thing for the team. Allowing Urias and Laureano to be on this roster and kind of play itself out a little before you bring them back. Last year, certainly, Jorge had bad luck with health. He got that concussion while in the on-deck circle, I believe in Boston. Cedric Mullins hit him on the back swing of a practice swing. That's just so fluky. Has a couple weeks off after that. Comes back. Isn't necessarily the same player that he was before, but certainly still provided a bit of spark. Then he had that elbow. I don't know how to say this medical term. Elbow subluxation. Subluxation. Again, no doctor, clearly. When he collided, him and Gunnar slid into each other, going after a ground ball. Really tore up his elbow. Ended up needing Tommy John. So he's recovering. Now, luckily, position players don't need the time to recover from Tommy John like a pitcher would, obviously. But still, there's some recovery there. I think he would be ready to go if they needed him to. But I think they're going to play it safe and also give themselves a little more flexibility. Why I say that Mateo deserves to be the Orioles utility guy when he comes back is because of really how he's played the past few years. But certainly let's just look into last season because he was playing very well to start the year. In the first 2 months of the season, he was batting .250, 16 extra base hits, 10 stolen bases by the end of May. Phenomenal stuff from Jorge Mateo before that concussion. When he came back from that concussion, he only hit .214 from there to the All-Star break. Last year, he crushed left-handed pitching, though. He had a .311 on-base percentage, an OPS of .799 when facing a lefty. And that's what I really like. I really think that he does more damage than a Ramon Urias. Possibly more than a Ramon Laureano, but that's left to be seen. I think that his speed obviously is a factor that damn near nobody on the team can contribute. Obviously, Gunnar and Holiday are very fast. Cowser is fast for his size, so is Adley, but obviously none of those two guys compared to Jorge Mateo's speed. And I think Mateo would, or is, the fastest Oriole in the entire clubhouse. So having his speed, and he's a bona fide stolen base machine, he knows how to use that speed, which, like we talked about with Jackson Holiday last episode, doesn't necessarily happen. You have to work to learn how to steal bases. It's not just that you're fast, for the most part. Now, Urias just doesn't provide, obviously, the speed, but also the flexibility Jorge Mateo provides. Urias is obviously more third, can play second, he can play first, but Mateo is second, short, outfield, and center field. He might be able to even play some third base potentially if the Orioles needed him to. I just really like Jorge Mateo more than Ramon Urias. Frankly, if you've been watching this show the past year plus, I'm sure you know that, because I've called for Ramon Urias' job a few times, and I've never once done that for Jorge Mateo. So when Mateo comes back, naturally, I think Urias is the main guy to go. One, I think he could actually bring back a little bit of value. And two, I think that he's just the most replaceable at this point. Obviously, we've liked his glove over the years. Last year, though, it seemed to struggle, at times at least. Offensively, he does provide a spark from time to time, but it just isn't there. I think Mateo provides just as much, if not more, of a spark than Urias. Frankly, though, like we said, he could take Laureano's job. Urias plays center field. That's part of where Laureano will be playing for the Orioles when he plays. And so between Urias and Laureano, they're kind of battling on who's going to struggle more. And that's probably the guy that Mateo takes. But I have a feeling Laureano is going to work out decently, at least, for these Orioles. Now, technically, he could get blocked for Coby Mayo. By the time Mateo is coming back, let's say in a month into the season, maybe Coby Mayo is the hottest hitter in the minors at that point. He's worked through these troubles. He's smashing the ball again. And out of nowhere, maybe Coby Mayo could go there. Ultimately, though, that still leaves a bit of a hole, because who's going to be your backup shortstop on days Gunnar can't go? Maybe it's Holiday. Maybe they play that game. But then you're taking these guys that you're like, we want you to master this second position, and not allowing him all the time to focus on that. It's not the easiest thing, even for a fast learner like Holiday, gang. Ultimately, though, my betting favorite would be Ramon Urias goes. Certainly, though, the roster flexibility that it provides the Orioles gives them the chance to kind of have Mateo in waiting for a couple weeks and see if maybe there's an injury that occurs. And that way you can keep everybody and just rotate IL spots. We'll see. Now, speaking a little on roster dark horse candidates, I have 4 guys that really are giving the Orioles something to think about. And this is all with being said, like we've talked about previously, that I think this roster is pretty much set. I think just the way with the options and the roster spot, I just think this roster is at least 95, if not 100% set. However, if there is somebody, or if there is a spot to open up, whether it be through injury or whether it just be through performance, and maybe the Orioles don't have the same mindset I have. Frankly, that wouldn't shock me, because this time last year, I was feeling some guys were going to make the roster who did not. So these are kind of four guys. Certainly there are more. Four guys I really think have, if not a good chance, are at least making the Orioles think. First one is Sam Basallo, gang. Do I think there really is a chance Sam Basallo starts the season on the Major League roster? No. I don't. I think, though, that he's making fans dream with how he's been performing. 375 batting average, OPS of over 1,000. You love seeing it. He's been mashing the ball. Hit a home run that he said was his third or one of his top 3 longest home runs of his life the other day. Again, no real chance probably to break camp. Certainly Rutschman and Sanchez, assuming they're healthy, have the 2 spots locked up for catcher. The idea of having a third catcher just doesn't seem realistic. It would be more Basallo as a first base option, and that's only going to happen if one of the first basemen go down. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we're not in a position where that looks, or that's even a reality right now, and hopefully it stays not a reality, gang. So, as much as we would love to see Sam Basallo up, he's not. And I understand I'm not saying Basallo anymore. That's my fault. It's going to happen. As I was saying Basallo, I realized it's Basallo. I should remember because of the song that we were singing last time. What can you do, though, gang? What can you do? Sometimes you mispronounce a young man's name. I have a good feeling there's going to come a time where I would never mispronounce Sam Basallo's name. Emmanuel Rivera is the next guy that we're going to touch on, and he, maybe more than anybody, is trying to bang down the door to a roster spot. Performing well this spring, 17 at-bats, an 813 OPS with 2 home runs, but really performed really well for the Orioles when he had his 27-game stint last year. Batted .313, 4 home runs, 14 RBIs, an OPS of 948 in those 27 games. Rivera was a spark that the Orioles needed in those times, too. It was amazing. He's a non-roster invitee, so I'm not positive, but I feel comfortable that maybe the Orioles can keep him in the system while he doesn't make the team, because he would be a great guy to have in the system, again, if you need to bring somebody up, and hopefully maybe he could repeat last year's 27-game performance if the Orioles needed him to. Definitely, though, is a front-runner to make the O's roster out of camp if a guy like Gunnar or Westy is on the IL. Again, I don't see that being the reality, and I don't see him beating out Ramon Urias, but Rivera is doing everything he can to make it known that he should be on this Major League roster. The next closest guy I would say is Cade Slim Povich, who we've talked about a couple times this year. And in his 2 starts, he's had 5 innings pitched, no runs, 7 Ks, showing elite control of his pitches so far, which is really what got him in trouble last year in the majors when he was not having successful starts. The lack of control put too many men on, and then when guys would hit the ball hard, there would be a lot of guys on to score. Cade seems that he's really found this alter ego, Slim, that's putting him in the right head zone, and he's putting pressure on 2 guys, in Albert Suarez, who has been struggling, and could possibly take his long role or spot start role. I don't think that's going to happen, but he's putting some pressure on him, and we've used Povich out of the pen before in that long relief role, so it wouldn't be the craziest thing to see. Also, he's kind of knocking on Dean Kramer's door a bit. Obviously, Kramer had that first really bad appearance. Second one was pretty good, so Kramer's trying to hold on to that 5th rotation spot, which I expect him to. However, it might, have it in the cards that that's the spot he ultimately takes this season. There's some talk, to go back to a previous episode, that Dean Kramer might be the number one guy that's at risk as far as the new wall dimensions, as far as Orioles pitchers go. He could be in a position to give up a lot more home runs, which frankly would really put him at risk of dropping out of the rotation. I think Dean has been putting in the work that he needs to and has the efficiency and the stuff to be successful. But it's something to watch for, because Cade Povich has been pitching so well that both Kramer and Suarez have a chance to lose their roster spot because of how good Povich has been. I don't think he's going to actually break through to start the season, but certainly it wouldn't shock me if within a month, if not sooner, Cade Povich is set in this Orioles rotation. The last guy I'm going to talk about being a dark horse is another guy we've mentioned a few times, Brandon Young. He was not included in the roster cuts last week, which is very telling that the Orioles like what they see from him, think that technically he is a chance to make this team, and certainly want to keep him in big league camp to have a closer eye on him, both watching and teaching. He's had 4 1/3 inning pitch, 2 runs, 4 hits, 2 walks. The 4 1/3 inning leads all Orioles relievers so far this spring. So just like Coby Mayo, the Orioles are giving this guy the opportunity. He's just taking advantage, at least somewhat, of those opportunities, unlike Coby Mayo. We know he was the Orioles minor league pitcher of the year last year, and the Orioles added him to the 40-man to keep him away from the Rule 5 draft, because that's how soon they think he can be a major league reliever. They are very high on him, and he's a guy that I would expect to make a real chance at this team, especially if Kittredge starts the season on the IL. Again, I think that it would go somewhere else. I really do. I think that it would be Brian Baker. But it wouldn't shock me if Brandon Young finds himself in that spot. He has been working on some new pitches this spring, which is one of the things that another reason I expect him to start back in the minors. They want him to continue developing those pitches. But they seem to like his stuff a lot. And he certainly is behind Brian Baker for that last reliever spot. But he's knocking on the door. He's knocking on the door. And with Kittredge getting injured recently and lining up to what maybe looks like an IL stint, there's a spot open for one of those two guys. So now the next guy I want to talk about is the milkman himself, Colton Cowser, and why he's potentially moving up. I think that a lot of signs show that Cowser could be the Orioles' next star. And I'm talking Gunnar Henderson level star, where he's in the MVP talk potentially. You might think that's crazy, but it's not. Last season, he had the third best OPS plus at 123 of all Orioles. So he was already in elite categories for the Orioles as far as production goes last season. Another great sign is how he really seemed to improve down the stretch last season. He had a stronger second half than he did first half, and that includes an absolutely monstrous April. I think April was his best month all season, and still, he well outperformed his first half in the second half. Let's just run down the numbers and compare. In the first half, he had a batting average of .219. Second half, .268. First half, an on base of .306. Second half, on base of .337. First half, slugging of .418. Second half, .477. In each the first and second half, he matched with 12 home runs. He had 13 doubles in the first half, only 11 in the second half. So that's where he outperformed his second half. But that's it. He matched in triples, both with 2. And he had one more RBI, 35 in the second half compared to 34 in the first half. he really seemed to get more comfortable with Major League pitching and adjusted to their adjustments. It's something we always talk with these young Major League Baseball players. You might come out of the gate very hot, like Colton Cowser did last April. And the league's going to adjust to you. They're going to see what you struggle with. They're going to see what you can't hit. They're going to see what you chase. They're going to set you up, and you're potentially going to struggle. But how do you adjust off of their adjustments? Are you able to counteract that? Because then they're going to continue making adjustments, and you counteract those, and that's how you put together an amazing second half for Colton Cowser. His K rate was high last year, 30.7 compared to the Major League average of 22.7. But I see good reason why he's going to cut down on those numbers. And if he cuts down on those numbers, his stats are going to soar. He had an exit velocity on average of 90.3, which is a mile an hour faster than the Major League average, and a hard hit rate of 46.1. Meanwhile, the Major League average is only 35%. So when he makes contact, he's hitting it at an amazing hard hit rate. Colton Cowser has all the makings of a guy that could absolutely catapult himself into the top 10 Major League outfield. You might look at me like, I don't think he's a top 10 Major League outfielder, but I think he could have a good year. Well, listen, you might not agree that WAR is the most perfect statistic, and you might not think that the top 10 WAR are the top 10 best guys. But if you look at the list of WAR as far as outfielders go last year, Colton Cowser tied 11th in WAR with a 4 WAR. So he's right there with being potentially a top 10 Major League outfielder, and that was with last year when he struggled so mightily at points in that first half, and really at times in that second half. I'm starting to project that maybe he might be this like Christian Yelich type player. And Yelich was great, MVP candidate, MVP winner. Christian Yelich, I think, might be a really good comparison to Colton Cowser. And it would not shock me that maybe Cowser gets himself in that MVP conversation, just like last year Gunnar got himself in that MVP conversation. Besides the statistics, though, he really just brings this looseness and this fun to the clubhouse. It's a great energy, and it's really a necessity to have for a winning team. A little bit of goofiness, a little bit of being able to take the edge off and just know something or anything to say that'll get guys kind of laughing or giggling, while also remaining serious. Because I don't want to paint Cowser as this joke. He is not. He takes the game very seriously. But he just has this looseness and this funness to him. I know we talked last season about how much we loved him and Westy kind of playing off each other, because Westy has this like real buttoned up, serious type attitude. Even though he can have fun and let loose and, be one of the guys, he just seems a lot more buttoned up than Colton Cowser, who's just like, this. I don't want to call him a doofus because that has negative connotations, but I love doofuses in my life sometimes. One of my best friends is this big doofus, and I love him. So, that's kind of the vibe I get. You know what I mean? Like a golden retriever energy, like they say. Like, oh, how we doing? Like, just funny. And I think that is going to mix with some of the best tools of any outfielder in baseball. Am I going to say he has better tools than Acuna or you name some of these guys, Judge or Trout even when healthy, or Chourio? Maybe not. Maybe he's a level under, but that doesn't mean he can't outperform these guys. I'm starting to feel like it's possible that Colton Cowser most likely puts up 30-plus home runs this year, and I could see potentially Cowser hitting 40-plus. Maybe that's absurd to some people, Maybe it's not going to be true, but we see the hard hit rate. When he gets the barrel on the ball, he hits it hard. And I really see him progressing as that hitter, not being dominated by Major League pitching, and only going to be better as it comes. I really think Colton Cowser might be the Orioles' next MVP candidate star that we're seeing. All right, so our next two topics are going to be real light and real quick. First one's going to be about the Orioles and Nationals Masson dispute finally getting settled after literally since the Nationals have been around, it was an issue and it was this story. We're going to turn it into a Jason Worth story that I really think you guys are going to love and appreciate. So we will get to that at the end, but let's just wrap up this Masson deal. The Nats are going to be on Masson this year for their final year. Then they can sell the rights to their games and their broadcasts after that. I think it's very good to just get rid of the distraction for the organization. Seemed like Angelos held on to that fight for so long because he knew how much that revenue meant to him and the organization with him as the owner. Seems like the new owners are more than comfortable being able to spend without having that extra revenue, and they feel very comfortable with having the banks to succeed in this game without that money. And if nothing else, I think it's overall good karma for the Orioles to let the Nationals just go and not have to worry about all of that crap just continuing and litigations and hearings and this and that and news stories. And it's over, gang. It's over. And that brings us to the Jason Worth story, a guy that was drafted by the Orioles, a guy that rose to prominence for the Phillies, but after he rose to prominence and won a World Series, he then signed a massive deal with the Nationals. You may or may not remember it. His first year he was with the Nationals was 2011. I remember it pretty well just, again, because I live around Philly and I follow baseball so deep that I understood that Jason Worth signed with the Nationals because they offered him a lot more money than anybody else, right? So he signed, in my mind, I want to say it was like $140 million, whatever the number was. I don't even think anybody else was going to give him a contract of over $100 million. Now, maybe if he heard me, he would say I'm completely wrong, and I may be. I don't have the inside information, but I remember all the reports, and when he signed that deal, people said the Nationals vastly overpaid, but they were in a spot similar to kind of the Orioles where they were looking to break through from their losing ways, and they had all these stud prospects, and they really were trying to take that next step, and they thought Worth would be that guy. And Worth is a cool dude, man. Worth is as cool as they come. Philly loved him. He was beloved in the city, and just an awesome dude. Like, he had the long hair and the beard by then, and very cool. And I never had an issue with Jason Worth. If anything, I was a big Jason Worth fan. I actually have a Jason Worth Phillies jersey shirt that I wear proudly. Like, I like Jason Worth. But sometimes, you do things kind of for entertainment or to think you're going to help your team, and it really backfires. So in his first year with the Nationals, it was the Friday before Preakness, Friday, May 20th, my dad's birthday actually, Friday, May 20th, 2011, Nationals and Orioles were starting a series in Camden Yards. When me and my buddies go down to Preakness, we try and hit an Orioles, and if they're not in town, maybe a Nationals game the night before on that Friday. So me and my buddy are at the game, and I'm tuned up. I've been drinking a little heavy. I wasn't outrageous, but I was feeling a little wild, and nobody really was at the game. Both teams were under 500, would finish the season under 500. Now the Nationals by a game, the Orioles by a lot more than a game. But again, nobody really cared about the game. Nobody was really there. It was very empty, and when with the people that were there, it was very quiet. Again, people might have been there to enjoy the game, but they didn't really care about the outcome so much. Neither did I. But me and my buddy just so happened to sit right along the right field wall, and Jason Worth was there. And I decided, for whatever reason, to start chirping Jason Worth nonstop. I was calling the man worthless. I was calling the man a sellout. And given, I'm just going to say up front, I'm the asshole. I'm in the wrong. I deserve everything that's about to come to me in this story. But Worth is looking at me going, I'm in Baltimore. Who cares about me here? Why is this kid chirping me? He's literally looking at me in between pitches, baffled. Beyond baffled. And I'm just berating him the entire time. He winds up having one of his best games of his professional career ever. Going 3 for 4 with 2 home runs, 4 RBIs, did get hit by a pitch too in his first at-bat, which probably helped fuel all of that because when he got hit, I'm sure I was adding that in there with whatever I was saying, and it wasn't crossing any real lines by any means, but certainly I was being more than a jerk. And after each time he did something positive, he would come back out to the outfield and start chirping a little back to me. At first, it was like, what do you got to say now? And I'm still chirping. I'm calling him worthless. I'm calling him a sellout. I'm booing him. And then he hits a home run, and he's getting a little cocky. And then I'm still booing him. Then he hits a second home run, and he comes back out. And at that point, I was defeated. And I was drinking my Budweiser. And so I was just like, this is all Bud Heavy's Worth. That's all I got now. You took everything else. All I got is the Bud Heavy now, Worth. And the Orioles lost that game 17-5. And I feel comfortable saying that if I ever met Jason Worth and I started describing that story, he would not remember it for the first 20 seconds. And then it would click. And he'd probably call me a bunch of bad names, deservingly so. And I hope he would say that laughing and not be too pissed. Because he's the man. And I was wrong in that situation. I'm the bad guy and I deserved everything I got. It also has given me, on a side note, a very interesting thought that I could gamble on a player and do that, heckle him the whole game, and potentially fuel myself this good game to gamble on. Almost like a reverse jinx. Like, go to a game that nobody's going to be at and bet on a random guy to hit 2 home runs and then just heckle him and hope that that fuels him to a positive game, and then we can both win because he had a great game and I would win money. Unfortunately, I didn't think that through and didn't bet that. I don't think I could have bet that in 2011, and certainly I didn't bet that, and I haven't practiced it yet. So we'll see if that ever comes into play. I'm hoping one day it will. But that's my Jason Worth story, gang. It's, again, doesn't paint me in the best picture, doesn't paint me in the best light, certainly paints me probably in a Philadelphia sports fan light to many of you, but neither here or there. I just did it for the heck of it. I just did it for some fun, and I hope Worth would appreciate my knowledge that I'm the asshole and my respect to him for how he shut me up and dominated me that day from the field. And I appreciate him beating my Orioles senseless that day and not me, because he would demolish me if he chose to. And I know that. Okay. So that's a little fun Jason Worth story. So we're going to wrap up today's episode with a little fun thing that I don't know how we haven't talked about yet, but I had to bring up. The Orioles all orange uniforms are back, gang. They were a thing of the early 70s, 71, maybe 72. They also wore them for a single game in 2010. I believe it was in Tampa Bay. Got great pictures of Steve Pearce and Adam Jones wearing them. But overall, I think a lot of fans are pretty down on it. Pretty negative. I've heard things like prison jumpsuit. I've heard things like popsicles. And frankly, I could see all that. Okay. I think it's going to be pretty glorious. I've heard some fans refer to it as glorious or exciting. Also, I really think it brings back a bit of Orioles magic, an Orioles magic type vibe, and I'm pretty excited to see it. I don't think they're going to wear it very often. I think it's just going to be a thing they do here and there, but they haven't announced it yet. So for all I know, they wear them once a week, and it's exciting. I think it'll just be cool, and I think that with winning, it's going to look a lot cooler. Remember, in 1971, they actually made the World Series, and they were wearing those uniforms, gang. So hopefully that's a sign to come. Now, they lost the World Series in 71 wearing them. Hopefully this year we can win the World Series wearing them. Neither here or there. I love the vibe. I, again, feel it brings back the nostalgic Orioles magic type vibe, and I'm excited to see them. I am. I love it. It's kind of cool. I'm going to be excited to play in them in MLB The Show. I can tell you that much. And yeah, I'm excited, gang. I'm excited for the season. I'm excited where we're at right now. And I'm excited where our players are at and how they've been performing. So with that being said, I think we're going to put a bow on this episode, just like Jason Worth put a bow on me in May 20th, 2011. And gang, we're going to wrap it up. I will see you after the weekend on Monday for our next episode. This was the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. Let's go O's!